Chapter 1, pages 1 to 7. Preface. This book is to be neither an accusation nor a confession, and least of all, an adventure. For death is not an adventure to those who stand face to face with it. It will try simply to tell of a generation of men who, even though they may have escaped shells, were destroyed by the war. Chapter 1, page 1. We were at rest 5 miles behind the front. Yesterday we were relieved, and now our bellies are full of beef and haricot beans. We are satisfied and at peace. Each man has another mess tin full for the evening, and what is more, there is a double ration of sausage and bread. That puts a man in fine trim. We have not had such luck as this for a long time. The cook with his carroty head is begging us to eat. He beckons with his ladle to every one that passes, and spoons him out a great dollop. He does not see how he can empty his stew pot in time for coffee. Chodden and Mueller have produced 2 wash basins, and had them filled up to the brim as a reserve. In Chodden, this is veracity. In Mueller, it is foresight. Where Chodden puts it all is a mystery, for he is and always will be as thin as a rake. What's more important still is the issue of a double ration of smokes. 10 cigars, 20 cigarettes, and 2 quids of chew per man. Now that is decent. I have exchanged my chewing tobacco with Kaczynski for his cigarettes, which means I have 40 altogether. That's enough for a day. It is true we have no right to this windfall. The Prussian is not so generous. We have only a miscalculation to thank for it. 14 days ago we had to go up and relieve the front line. It was fairly quiet on our sector. So the quartermaster who remained in the rear had requisitioned the usual quantity of rations and provided for the full company of 150 men. But on the last day, an astonishing number of English heavies opened up on us with high explosive, drumming ceaselessly on our position, so that we suffered severely and came back only 80 strong. Last night we moved back and settled down to get a good sleep for once. Kaczynski is right when he says it would not be such a bad war if only one could get a little more sleep. In the line we have had next to none, and 14 days is a long time at one stretch. It was noon before the first of us crawled out of our quarters. Half an hour later, every man had his mess tin, and we gathered at the cookhouse, which smelt greasy and nourishing. At the head of the queue, of course, were the hungriest. Little Albert Kropp, the clearest thinker among us, and therefore only a lance corporal. Mueller, who still carries his school textbooks with him, dreams of examinations, and during a bombardment mutters propositions in physics. Lear, who wears a full beard and has a preference for the girls from officers' brothels. He swears that they are obliged by an army order to wear silk chemises and to bathe before entertaining guests of the rank of captain and upwards. And as the fourth myself, Paul Boehmer. All 4 are 19 years of age, and all 4 joined up from the same class as volunteers for the war. Close behind us were our friends, Chodden, a skinny locksmith of our own age, the biggest eater of the company. He sits down to eat, as thin as a grasshopper, and gets up as big as a bug in the family way. High Westus, of the same age, a peat digger, who can easily hold a ration loaf in his hand and say, "Guess what I've got in my fist." Then Dietering, a peasant, who thinks of nothing but his farmyard and his wife. And finally, Stanislaus Kaczynski, the leader of our group, shrewd, cunning, and hard-bitten, 40 years of age, with a face of the soil, blue eyes, bent shoulders, and a remarkable nose for dirty weather, good food, and soft jobs. Our gang formed the head of the queue before the cookhouse. We were growing impatient, for the cook paid no attention to us. Finally, Kaczynski called to him, "Say, Heinrich, open up the soup kitchen. Anyone can see the beans are done." He shook his head sleepily. You must all be there first, Chadden grinned. We are all here. The sergeant still took no notice. That may do for you, he said, but where are the others? They won't be fed to you by you today. They're either in the dressing station or pushing up daisies. The cook was quite disconcerted as the fact dawned on him. He was staggered. And I have cooked for 150 men. Crop poked him in the ribs. Then for once we'll have enough. Come on, begin. Suddenly a vision came over Chadden. His sharp, mousy features began to shine. His eyes grew small with cunning. His jaws twitched, and he whispered hoarsely, Man, then you've got bread for 150 men too, eh? The sergeant cook nodded, absent-minded and bewildered. Chadden seized him by the tunic. In sausage? Ginger nodded again. Chadden's chaps quivered. Tobacco too? Yes, everything. Chadden beamed. What a bean feast. That's all for us. Each man gets, wait a bit, yes, practically 2 issues. Then Ginger stirred himself and said, That won't do. We got excited and began to crowd around. Why won't that do, you old carrot? Demanded Kaczynski. 80 men can't have what is meant for 150. We'll soon show you, growled Mueller. I don't care about the stew, but I can only issue rations for 80 men, persisted Ginger. Kaczynski got angry. You might be generous for once. You haven't drawn food for 80 men. You've drawn it for the second company. Good. Let's have it then. We are the second company. We began to jostle the fellow. No one felt kindly toward him, for it was his fault that the food often came up to us in the line, too late and cold. Under shell fire, he wouldn't bring his kitchen up near enough, so that our soup carriers had to go much farther than those of the other companies. Now Bulk of the first company is a much better fellow. He is as fat as a hamster in winter, but he trundles his pots when it comes to that right up to the very front line. We were in just the right mood, and there would certainly have been a dust-up if our company commander had not appeared. He informed himself of the dispute and only remarked, Yes, we did have heavy losses yesterday. He glanced into the Dixie. The beans looked good. Ginger nodded. Cooked with meat and fat. The lieutenant looked at us. He knew what we were thinking, and he knew many other things too, because he came to the company as a non-com and was promoted from the ranks. He lifted the lid from the Dixie again and sniffed. Then, passing on, he said, Bring me a plateful. Serve out all the rations. We can do with them. Ginger looked sheepish as Chadden danced round him. It doesn't cost you anything. Anyone would think the quartermaster's stores belong to him. And now get on with it, you old blubber sticker, and don't you miscount either. You be hanged, spat out Ginger. When things got beyond him, he throws up the sponge altogether. He just goes to pieces. As if to show that all things were equal to him of his own free will, he issued in an addition 1/2 pound of synthetic honey to each man.